Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is John Campea, and this is part 2 of our Spider-Man No Way Home open spoiler discussion. Now, of course, about a week ago, we did part 1, but there were so many comments and questions again sent in, we didn't have nearly enough time to get around to all of them, so we're going to start getting caught up on those in parts 2 and part 3, and we're going to do that right now. Now, of course, obviously by the title, in case you can't tell, this is an open spoiler discussion. That means every little plot point, every little story turn, every little detail about the film, we're going to be talking about. So if you haven't seen Spider-Man No Way Home yet, just add this video to your favorites and come back and watch it a little bit later. Otherwise, let's buckle up and dive right in to the outstanding comments and entries we have. All right, we're going to start getting caught up here with Matt McLean, who writes, "Most of this movie is great, but I am not a fan of how they decided to end it. I feel like it invalidates the entire MCU Spider-Man journey." I disagree. I think it was a logical conclusion of the Spider-Man journey up until this point. Like, it is the next natural evolutionary part. It doesn't invalidate. Like, it gives us all of the background, story and everything about how he got to the point where he's at. What brought him to the next chapter. The start of a new chapter for a character never invalidates what happens in the chapter previous. It's just the culmination of that and the launching off part to the next part of the story. So I personally thought it worked okay. All right. Robert Zaleski writes, "This movie could have gone off the rails pretty quickly, but they mixed the fan service in effectively with the story. That was impressive to me. I was most impressed by the performances, though. The performances were great. And I have a feeling that amongst all the various fan service aspects of the movie, Toby and Andrew popping up and the fairly inconsequential and frankly rather meaningless Charlie Cox appearance, even though that was fun to see, that's dominating a lot of the conversation. But yes, the performances themselves are going to kind of get overlooked, but I hope people will think about them more in time. All right, Matthew De Frentius writes, "Am I the only one wondering what these cures did to Toby and Andrew's timelines? With Goblin cured, how does he not get impaled by his own glider now?" All right. I'm glad you brought this up because you guys know one of my big problems with this movie is I understand the heroes making mistakes, but then the heroes can be just outright plain stupid. Now remember, I love this movie. I love Spider-Man No Way Home. I've seen it a couple times already. I love it. That said, I am very irritated by Peter's utter stupidity. Like when Doctor Strange tells you, yeah, you see, if these 4 guys are here, it literally puts into danger the entire fabric of reality as we know it. Everybody's life on this planet could be at risk. You're risking everybody's lives. And Spider-Man decides, oh, well, that's my decision to make. Those 3 children who live up the street, putting their lives in danger is my decision. So I get to choose that everybody else's lives should be at risk for me to save these 4 supervillains. That, every time I see the movie, it actually stands out as being worse and worse to me. And I love the movie overall, I do. But that Peter would be literally that myopic, that selfish, that self-centered, that idiotic is really off-putting more and more every time I see the thing. But here's the kicker. You brought it up a great point. Peter had no assurances, that if I cure Goblin of his goblininess, that means he'll live when he goes back to his time. He has no assurances of that. If I cure Doc Ock of the little inhibitor in his neck, there's no guarantee that means if he goes back that he will survive when he goes back. I mean, I could see why you'd think that. I would think that, but there's no guarantee. So not only is Peter willing to put everybody's life at risk so he can try to save these 4 supervillains, there's not even any guarantee he has that once they go back to their own timelines that they won't instantly die. Because he just simply has no idea. And you're right. That to me is one of the little flaws in the movie. Anyway, and I say that as somebody who absolutely loves this movie. Okay. Next up, we've got Dragon 10 who writes, "Do you think Peter should have listened to Strange and sent the villains back?" Yes, 100%, absolutely. If he'd have done that, May would be alive and he'd have his friends. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, it was very convenient how they wrote the movie that nobody else died except Aunt May. With all the carnage and destruction, 50, 100, 200 people easily could have died. But yes, the right decision for Spider-Man at that point is see if there's a way to help these guys. But as soon as Doctor Strange tells you, you're putting everything at risk. Everybody's lives are at risk. And you don't get to choose whose lives get to be at risk. These guys, yes, he should have sent them back. And here's the other thing, too. I want to point this out. Mary Jane, I keep calling her Mary Jane. Her name is not Mary Jane. MJ, when Peter gives her the box, she's like, all right, but as soon as things go sideways, I'm hitting that button. Great. Are you telling me that as MJ is sitting there watching the news and seeing that these 4 villains have now gotten out of control, they've blown up Happy's building, and Aunt May is now dead? You're telling me MJ wouldn't have instantly turned to that box and go, button press? Are you telling me she wouldn't have instantly done that? Of course she would have done that. So anyway, yeah, there's that. Okay, let's see. Next up, Barth Revan writes, 5 a.m. on Friday down here in Escondido, and I just got home from seeing a 2 a.m. screening with my girlfriend. I saw the original Spider-Man when I was 5 and cannot believe I just witnessed that. You know, one of the great things, we've spent the first couple of minutes here bagging on the things we didn't like about the movie, but one of the great things about this movie is what could have easily slipped into useless, stupid, shticky fan service. They actually integrated into a tight, wonderful narrative with the kind of bringing full circle the original Spider-Man movies, the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies, and bringing into this one extremely satisfied, tightly knit narrative that really was satisfying as a story. The gimmick and the fan service aside, the gimmick and the fan service were used perfectly and used to enhance narrative, which is what most filmmakers forget to do. And yeah, that is great that you can remember seeing the original film, coming back and seeing this now, and have it all come full circle. That's one of the great things about this movie, Barth. All right, next up. Jim X Mafia writes, interesting PS4 Easter eggs. Aunt May's grave. If you help someone, you help everyone. Also, Pete's new apartment lifted straight from the game. I noticed that. I didn't notice the if you help someone, you help everyone. I didn't remember that from the game. I probably should have. But as soon as you saw that apartment, it totally reminded you of the apartment in the game. That's a good observation. All right. Oh, no, sorry. That was Barth Revan after that. I skipped Jim X Mafia. Jim X Mafia wrote, John, I cry when Toby and Andrew appear. The Spider Trio battle, Andrew saving MJ, and Toby got stabbed. Fun movie, and I can't wait for Supreme Doctor Strange. Again, I mean, we're all assuming, including me, that is indeed Supreme Doctor Strange. We don't know for sure. It might not be, but it seems pretty clear that it is. And it'll be interesting to see what direction they take it from there, if that's what they're doing. All right. Next up, we've got Collins E, who writes, so Eddie Brock knows a Peter Parker who we've yet to see. Okay. So the predominant theory here is at the end of Venom 2, Venom is talking to Eddie, and he says, we know things across infinite universes. Now, when I first heard that, I interpreted as him just talking about their own reality's expansive universe, right? But, you know, the predominant theory is that the Venom symbiote is connected even across multiple realities. I don't know how that makes any sense, but if he is, then the very fact that Topher Grace's Venom met, or Tobey Maguire's Venom, I met Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, I should say, that means the symbiote, they know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So why that just brought in Venom and not all the symbiotes? Because if one symbiote knows, all the symbiotes should know. So that's another logic flaw. That's another logic flaw. If that's what brought in Tom Hardy's Venom, the fact that all symbiotes know because they're all connected through the hive mind, then why did only one symbiote come through and not like legions of symbiotes? Because they would technically all know. That's actually a very good question that I haven't pondered before. All right, next up, Christopher Benson writes, Andrew Garfield's performance was wonderful. Seeing his emotion after saving MJ was the highlight of the film for me. Can't wait to see it again. Dude, listen, I've been singing about this for a while. I have for years trumpeted that Andrew Garfield was a great Spider-Man. And I've constantly been faced with shouts of, nah, his Spider-Man wasn't that good. But now all of a sudden, everybody's like, give them an amazing Spider-Man 3, which of course I love because I've been singing about how great Andrew Garfield is to Spider-Man for years. But now everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. And I'm fine with that. Jump on board. There's plenty of room. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is awesome. And I think after Spider-Man No Way Home, it's settled. He's the best Spider-Man we've ever had. I love Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. I love Tom Holland's Spider-Man. I think Andrew Garfield's, after this movie, to me, it's definitive. He's the best Spider-Man we've ever had, but that's just me. All right. Gabe Campbell writes, so we can all agree that was evil Doctor Strange from What If, right? That is our assumption. I mean, I'm assuming it is, but let's keep in mind there is a possibility it's something else entirely, right? That could be a curveball that they're throwing us. It might be another Doctor Strange. Who knows? But yes, the operating assumption right now, Gabe, is that's the Dark Doctor Strange from What If. All right, Tim Platt writes, Toby stops Tom from killing Green Goblin. Audience applauds. Camera cuts to close-up of Toby. Me, like Christopher Lloyd in Star Trek 3, get out of here, like when he played a Klingon. A lot of people, first of all, big points to you, Tim, for even remembering that Christopher Plummer also played a Klingon. He played General Chang. That Christopher Lloyd played a Klingon in Star Trek 3. Big points to you for that, Tim. All right. Murph writes, where are we at? Oh, yes. Is this the end of Spider-Man in the MCU? Thank you, Amy Pascal, Kevin Feige, and Tom Holland. That was everything I wanted from this movie and more. Here's the brilliant thing. When they completed shooting this movie, which is well over a year ago, they still didn't know what the future of the Sony Marvel deal was. And here's what I think is brilliant about the ending of this movie. What is brilliant about the ending of Spider-Man No Way Home is it literally gives them loads of flexibility. Because on the one hand, with nobody even remembering Peter Parker now, so nobody would ever mention him, it is very easy now just to take him over to the Sonyverse and have Spider-Man now be in the Sonyverse because nobody remembers Peter Parker. Easy. But the way they ended the movie also makes it very easy just to do the next Spider-Man movie also in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was brilliant planning on their part to leave themselves with a very satisfying ending and an ending that gives them great flexibility. And now they can literally go either way. Now, there are a bunch of people out there misquoting, or at least only partially quoting, which ends up being a misquote of, did you hear that Kevin Feige said they are already in the planning stages for Spider-Man 4? Okay, yeah, he kind of said that, but everybody is leaving out what was said immediately before he said that. Because that interview was done with Amy Pascal and Kevin Feige. I mean, movie audiences really usually only hear what they want to hear. But then again, I think we're all guilty of that, me included. But we only ever hear what we want to hear. And so everybody reads that one part of the comment, that one quote. Kevin Feige says, we're kind of already discussing ideas for Spider-Man 4. That doesn't mean a Spider-Man 4 has been greenlit or they're discussing ideas. That's great. But everybody is leaving out what Amy Pascal said immediately before that, which is basically this. We're all being optimistic. I'm paraphrasing Amy Pascal a little bit, but you can go and read the quote yourself. Amy Pascal starts off by saying, look, I was just kind of misquoted there for some things she said previously. We're all optimistic. As producers, we're all kind of hoping what we can do, and we're being optimistic that maybe something can get done. And then Kevin Feige says, yeah, so we're already in the discussion stages about a Spider-Man 4, blah, blah, blah. So basically, nothing is done. Nothing is done right now. If you take Amy Pascal, who was sitting there with Kevin Feige, what she said before you read what Kevin Feige said, you understand that nothing's really done yet. So we'll see what happens. But again, I think the brilliance on Marvel and Sony's part was to end this film so satisfactorily and with such flexibility that now they can go either way, depending on what they decide to do with their deal moving forward. All right. Let's move on here. Next up, that was Murph. Next up, we got KC Mack. And KC Mack writes, 1 of 5. Well, John, I saw this movie 2 times, once with a friend, the other by myself, and loved the hell out of it both times. We found out that Andrew Garfield is actually the werewolf. I don't know what that means. And Charlie Cox is now in the MCU as well. The crowd I was with both times cheered at the big surprises that happened in this movie. And one of my favorite parts in this movie is that they gave Andrew Garfield the redemption he needed when they had him save MJ, something that we all knew was going to happen when we saw that trailer of her falling like Gwen Stacy did. I also thought even though Tom Holland started off the same teen Spider-Man as he did in the previous films, I thought he matured into a better mature and adult Spider-Man in the end. Overall, this, in my opinion, This is, in my opinion, the best MCU Spider-Man out of the trilogy. I agree with that. I wouldn't say it's better than Spider-Man 2. I also wouldn't say that. Although I think it's up there as one of the best Spider-Mans, and who knows what the future holds after this. First of all, I agree completely. I adore Homecoming and Far From Home, but this was the best of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man movies. I think this is easily the best of the trilogy. Now, as far as overall Spider-Man movies, I still have Into the Spider-Verse and Spider-Man 2 ahead of it in no particular order. But I think this, out of the 9 Spider-Man films, I think this is probably the third best one, which is saying a lot because I have it ahead of movies that I love, like the original Spider-Man, Sam Raimi Spider-Man, the original The Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, Homecoming, Far From Home. I put it above all those. It really did represent itself really, really well, and I had a great time both times that I went to see this in theaters. All right, where are we at here? Next up, we got Rylan Holman, and Rylan Holman writes, I'm seeing it today for the first time at 2:30. This one will be special because the last movie I saw with my father in theaters before he died was Homecoming. Oh man, we talked first. That's so special. You know, we talk a lot on the show about movies being shared experiences, and how often you've heard me tell the story many times that when my best friend died a number of years ago, it made me just, whenever I think of Michael Keaton's Batman, I think of him, because he and I, as kids, we got on a bus, took it to downtown Hamilton, went to the movie theaters in Lloyd D. Jackson Square, got in line and watched Batman as kids. And that's with me forever. And those experiences are so key. And the fact that it was a Spider-Man movie you saw with your dad, it's going to make Spider-Man movies just that much extra special for you for the rest of your life. And I think that's a really cool thing. All right. Thanks for sharing that, man. All right. Next up, we got Henry B, who writes, 1 of 4. Hey, John, greetings from Toronto, my old stopping grounds. Hope you and your team are well. I was fortunate to see Spider-Man on Thursday, and I loved it. The best Spider-Man film for me, since it ties into the previous iterations. My wife, who is Filipina, loved the scene with Ned's mom speaking in Tagalog. That's actually, I think, his grandmother, his Lola. That was his grandmother. Anyway, speaking in Tagalog, regarding the fight scene between Spider-Man and the Goblin at Happy's condo, it was nice to see Spider-Man get his ass handed to him, which to me shows the villain as a major threat. For me, the best scene was the moment Holland's Peter Parker was about to murder Goblin, and the original Peter, Parker, Toby, steps in, gives him that stern look. That moment hit home for me and reminds me of reading the comics as a kid and the values this hero stood for. Hope you enjoyed the movie. I did. I enjoyed the movie very, very much. The one thing I will say, though, it is important to have a villain like Goblin fend very well against the hero to represent them as a big threat. Like in Infinity War, they did it by, what's the first thing they threw at Thanos in Infinity War? Hulk, right? Took a bunch of shots, but then beat Hulk's ass. That set him up instantly. This guy's the biggest threat in the universe, right? With or without the gauntlet, he's the biggest threat in the universe. Although he already had the Power Stone, but still, with or without a completed Infinity Gauntlet, he's the baddest man in the universe. The one thing I will say that I found a little questionable is at the fight in Happy's apartment, or at least outside of the apartment, Spider-Man is up on Goblin's shoulders with his knees on each side of his head, and he is raining down what we would call ground and pound, even though Goblin was still on his feet. But he's raining down ground and pound, like boom, like haymaker after haymaker after haymaker. And Goblin's just smiling and laughing at him. Like, just smiling and laughing at him. Later in the film, Peter punches him, and it's hurting him. Well, if he literally had his face exposed and helpless and was raining down shot after shot, how come they never bothered or hurt Goblin, but all of a sudden later, taking those exact same shots was really hurting him? I don't know, whatever. It's the movies. I guess it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I did like the fact that, you know, Toby decided to step in there, because it would have made, if he had killed Goblin in that moment, it would have undone the entire reason they were doing it. It literally would have made that Aunt May died for nothing. She died because of the belief that she thought they should help these four, even though it's a ridiculous thought, but still. And Toby's Peter knew that if Tom's Peter killed that Goblin, that it would wreck him for life, because if he killed that goblin, then ultimately Aunt May died for nothing. And I love the fact, I thought that was a very powerful, poignant part of the film, man. Really, really strong. All right. Next up, Peyton Null writes, contender for best comic book trilogy of all time. Well, there's not obviously it's a contender because there's not much competition. Because how many comic book trilogies are there? Well, you got Superman, the Christopher Reeve Superman. You got Captain America. You got Iron Man. You got Thor. You got Spider-Man. The Avengers one. I mean, so it's in the conversation. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the Avengers trilogy, whichever number of them you want to put in there. I don't think it compares to the Captain America trilogy. I would put it on par with the Thor trilogy. Maybe even have it a little bit above the Thor trilogy. I would put it above the Iron Man trilogy. But yeah, at the very minimum, the Captain America, the Avengers films, I put those above it right now. But yeah, I think it's in the conversation at any rate. All right, let's see. Next up, Sidious Swift writes, good morning. I'm glad to see all the positive reviews. I'll be watching it at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Then I'll be watching Nightmare Alley. Thanks, AMC A-List. I know I remember back in the day, having conversations with friends about this is what like A-List was meant for, right? Like when Infinity War or Endgame is coming out and you just want to go see this movie 5 times in a week. A-List is a godsend for these things, man. It absolutely is. All right. Peyton Null writes, I believe it's better than the Captain America trilogy. Oh, that's fair. I completely disagree with you. It's nowhere close to the Captain America trilogy, because if you take the 6 films of the Captain America trilogy and the Spider-Man MCU trilogy, 3 of the top 4 out of those 6 are the Captain America films. Like Civil War and Winter Soldier are both better than Spider-Man No Way Home. I would then have, so the way I would rank it is in no particular order in the top 2, but the top 2 would be Civil War and Winter Soldier. You can decide which one is 1 and which one's 2. Then I would have Spider-Man No Way Home. Then I would probably have Captain America, the First Avenger, and then Homecoming and Far From Home. I mean, the reality is I dearly like all 6 of those movies. All 6 of those movies. But yeah, I don't think this Spider-Man trilogy compares to the Captain America trilogy. Like I said, when the top 2 out of the 6 films are both Captain America movies, I think the discussion's over right there. I respect your opinion. Your opinion is no less valid than my own. But I disagree, and the reason why I disagree is I just don't think it compares. I think the Captain America trilogy is clearly superior, but that's just my own opinion, Peyton. Thank you for sharing yours. All right, next up, we got Marion McLean, who writes, I saw it twice tonight. Nice. Oh, by the way, and Marion tipped in like $50 to the channel. Thank you so much, Marion, for supporting our channel on that level. That's incredibly generous of you. I saw it twice last night. Props to John Watts. This is absolutely the best of the trilogy. I absolutely agree. Seeing it again tonight, I loved how everything flowed. Nothing felt forced, and the movie is hilarious. I'll know tonight if it's my favorite Spider-Man movie. Bring on the filthy. And that's the thing. In all of this, the one thing being overlooked, we talked a little bit about the performances earlier, but really the biggest thing that's going to get overlooked is John Watts. John Watts has very quietly, sorry, I got an ice cube in my mouth, has very quietly slipped into the Spider-Man world, bringing us Homecoming, did Far From Home, and now has done this. And when we talk about these Spider-Man movies, obviously, for rightfully so, we talk about Tom Holland. Obviously, and rightfully so, we talked about Kevin Feige. But the director of these films is getting very little credit. You know, he doesn't carry the sex appeal of the Russo brothers or whatever else. But John Watts is the unsung hero. He has been the director, the person in the chair, conducting this orchestra of these Spider-Man movies, and he brought it home, man. He did an absolutely wonderful job. All right. Jim X Mafia writes, I think Ray yelled big surprises during the screening. Now, I think during our first screening of it, I think he did kind of whisper, but he didn't say it loudly for everybody to hear, but he went, big surprises. I think that got a lot of people laughing. All right. Stephen Wolf writes, John, the biggest issue I had with No Way Home was by the time the movie came, most if not all the significant scenes were leaked onto YouTube's suggestion page. How can this be stopped Your thoughts, John? Yeah, listen, that was huge because I don't really care. Like, oh, this person's in the movie. Well, who cares? That's not a significant thing. I mean, it's significant, but what happens in the movie? What are the plot turns and all that kind of stuff? And you're right, before the movie ever came out, the whole movie was online. The whole movie was online. I remember days before the movie came out, days before our private screening and all that kind of stuff. I loaded up YouTube and there it is. Scene where Toby Peter stops Tom Peter from killing Goblin. Right there in the suggestion page. With Toby grabbing the sled as Tom was trying to kill him with it. The popping right up there in the scene was, what was it? It was the one, Ned promises to never become supervillain, like Toby's best friend. Right there. And you see Ned in the thumbnail, Ned talking to Toby, and it was all that. That was the whole suggestion page. The whole movie was out and online. How do you stop it? I mean, YouTube's got to do, look, it's a huge thing. Millions of videos are uploaded to YouTube every single day. It is tough to moderate. But they got to have some kind of algorithm that can detect that. And just literally showing 7-minute chunks of the movie, plus the entire movie was online too. I mean, it was, I don't know. I don't know how you do it. The only thing I can think of, because I'm not even sure if those screeners came from screenings of the movie. They might have come from like private studio viewings. I mean, I don't know, but it's a tough one. They got to get on top of it though. All right. Next up, Cam K writes, I took it the new spell strange casted at the end would override the effects of the original, thus canceling and dissipating it and its consequences. Yeah, maybe, but there was still a big problem. My buddy Matt pointed out to me one big problem with Doctor Strange's spell at the end. Okay. So in the post-credit scene, Tom Hardy gets sent back. Tom Hardy and Venom get sent back, but a little piece of Venom gets left behind, right? How does that make any sense? And I didn't even think about this when I watched the movie, but my buddy Matt brought it up. He's like, so you're telling me this magic spell, it's magic. This magic spell could wipe people's memories, remove people from the universe, erase pictures on people's walls, erase hard drives of news footage, change digital records and online things of newspapers and news articles, all the tweets, all the things about Peter Parker, blah, 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 blah. It can do all that. Oops, the magic spell left behind a little piece. Really? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. If Doctor Strange's spell had that global wide effect on everything, down to the point of erasing a picture that might be in your wallet of you and a couple of classmates, one of which was Peter Parker, and all that kind of stuff, a piece of the symbiote just got left behind, that made no sense. That absolutely made no sense whatsoever, but whatever. All right, next up, Russell Amador writes, those pictures you posted some time ago, they were very telling. I'll keep it cryptic, but thought, man, those were legit after seeing the movie. Yeah, I mean, they were. Even going into the movie, I was not convinced that those pictures that I got were even real. I still thought there was a chance they weren't real. I mean, look, that Toby and Andrew were in the movie, everybody's known that for a year. And if they didn't know that, then like 4 or 5 months ago, when that picture of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire together on the scaffolding came out, then people knew then. And if they still didn't know, then when the video of Andrew Garfield on set in front of the green screen in this Spider-Man costume, that let everybody know. And if that didn't let everybody know, the 20 or 30 news reports that came out almost a year ago saying it's confirmed, blah, 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 and I mean, they already knew and everything like that. But even then, even though I knew Toby and Andrew were going to be in the movie, even then I still wasn't 100% convinced that the pictures that I had were actually legit. Of course they were. They did end up being legit, but I was curious watching the movie to find out if those scenes were actually in the movie, and there they were. All right, next up. James Argento writes, in The Hollywood Reporter, Robert Rodriguez said every episode of Boba Fett has big surprises. Could that mean we see Luke and Grogu, Han, Kira, and Crimson Dawn? I appreciate you asking, James, but we're here to talk about Spider-Man right now, man. But we're going to have a lot to talk about Boba Fett in the coming days for sure. Black Rice writes, $50 million in Thursday night previews. Spider-Man will undoubtedly go past 200 million now. The end result will be closer to 250 million. And that was prophetic because it did. It made, what was the final number? 253 or something like that. Anyway, 250 million, then 190. Kim has a chance to win this bet. And Kim did win the bet. So for those of you who don't know, Kim and I had a bet. We set the line at 249.5. And over and under. I took the under 249.5. She took the over of 249.5. And it was close. But Kimberly won. Straight up, she won that bet. All right, next up. Abraham Ruiz writes, there's a review I saw that says Tom's origin story is complete. Time for him to be Spider-Man. And I think it sums up the trilogy, if that makes sense. I agree. Like, one of the things that I adored and loved about the end of this movie was that, oh, you mean he actually gets to be Spider-Man now? Because you know me, I've loved Homecoming, Far From Home, definitely No Way Home. I've loved these movies. But the one constant gripe I've had is that they've felt the need to make him Iron Man Jr. He's got to have an AI suit of Iron Man armor with its own built-in AI piloting system and weaponry and blah, blah, because Spider-Man's not cool enough. Spider-Man's not cool. No. Iron Man's cool. So in order for Spider-Man to be cool, you've got to give him Iron Man armor. Because that's what it is. He has Iron Man armor, just that it's painted in Spider-Man colors. That's all it is. And that part's always kind of irritated me. So I was thrilled at the end of this movie to see that all the Stark tech is gone. He's got the homemade suit, even though it still looks really awesome. And he's finally Spider-Man. So I did enjoy that a lot. All right, next up. Fangblaze71 writes, really liked this movie, but I felt the pacing was very bad at many parts. From sad and emotional to happy and joking, when it should have stayed emotion. I mean, that's a matter of taste. Personally, I like it when these MCU movies or any movies know when to change gears. You don't want to sit in the happy, jokey mood for too long because that loses its efficiency if you don't have something else come up and change the mood, and then you bring it back to humor later. You don't want to be wallowing in emotion for too awful long, or else you can get heavy into those too much, and it can kind of sink the spirits of the audience. You want to make sure you pepper in the right thing. So personally, Fangblaze, I respect your opinion. I see where you're coming from. But I got to say, I think that was a strength of the movie, but that's just me. All right. Movies with Moss sends in like a $20 super chat. Thank you, Movies with Moss. Appreciate that. This film was amazingly beautiful. My aunt who raised me passed away last year, so the Aunt May scene, the rooftop conversation, and the graveyard conversation with Happy made me fold like a lawn chair. The power of film, thank you for all you do. And Movies with Moss, I mean, we were talking a little bit earlier about the power of movies. These are shared experiences, and your story there just captures it perfectly. Like, we go into these movies and we see movies are most powerful, I find, when we recognize elements of our own life in the movies. Like, I often talk about my experience with Clerks 2 and why that movie is so special to me, because it was talking about one of the guys contemplating moving away for a job and moving away from his friends and family. At the same time I saw that movie, it was when I was going through that same decision-making process. Should I move halfway across the country for a job when I had a lot of friends and people that I loved where I was? And that movie became forever super special to me. Clerks 2, always be special to me. So when a movie speaks to a personal experience we have, we find ourselves even more drawn to it. And the fact that your aunt was kind of that for you, Movies with Moss, I think that's a really special thing. Thanks for sharing your experience with that with us, man. That's really good. All right. Logan Hoyne writes, people complained about the MCU Spider-Man not having an origin story. I believe this trilogy was his origin story, transforming him into the hero we know. I'll be honest with you. I never heard personally, and I get hundreds of emails and messages a day from people. I don't think I've ever heard anybody complaining that this Spider-Man didn't have an origin story. I never felt like we needed one. Like, we had literally 2 iterations of Spider-Man in the last couple of decades. Did we really need another origin story? Is there anybody here, hands up, that doesn't know the origin of Spider-Man? At some point, he got bit by a radioactive spider, developed all these powers, and decided to use them to be a hero, and he became Spider-Man. So I've never personally heard anybody complain that we didn't get an origin story. But I completely agree with you that as we get to the end of this trilogy, we actually see the birth of what I would call the true Spider-Man. And I thought that was that's a good observation, Logan. All right, next up. Rodney Lorino writes, Andrew's emotion after saving MJ was heartbreaking. It was a beautiful moment. I love that they paused on it there for a second with all the action going on and quick cutting and stuff like that. Once he saved MJ, the fact that not only did he get to soak in that emotion, that we as the audience got to just hold there for a beat and enjoy that. I thought it was a great editing decision on their part. Manny's World 85 writes, what a day to be alive. Going to see No Way Home at 6:30 tonight. This would have been the other day, obviously. My boss told me, you seem super stoked today. I told him 2 words, big surprises. And it's like everybody on Spider-Man Day was like, game day. It was an excellent day to be there, Manny's World. All right, next up. Where are we at here? We are at Out of Time, 1985 writes, when I saw No Way Home last night, the guy next to me came dressed as Andrew Spider-Man, his date dressed as Gwen, and a guy behind us dressed up as Doctor Strange. That is, look, I don't care whether it's a Star Wars movie or a DC movie or an MCU movie. I get a huge kick. I very rarely dress up myself, but still, I love going to these movies and seeing people dress up. Even when it's like a Harry Potter movie and people get dressed up as Harry Potter. You know why? It's the same reason I love going to, whether it's to a hockey game, a basketball game, a football game. You go in there and the crowd is dressed in their jerseys. That's cosplay. Like when you go to a sporting event and you see everybody dressed in jersey, that's sports fans' version of cosplay. They're all cosplaying, putting on their favorite sports team jerseys, their player's number and name on their jersey and stuff like that. It's cosplay. And it just adds to the event atmosphere when you're at a sports arena. Same is true when I go to a movie theater. I get a big, big kick out of seeing people in their Spider-Man t-shirts or their Iron Man costumes or whatever. I get a big kick out of it, and I always will. All right, next up. Stars writes, these last few months were amazing. I loved Eternals, was blown away by Spidey, and completely fell in love with Shang-Chi, my #1 favorite MCU film. Hey, listen, I may not have been a big fan of Hawkeye, but I quite enjoyed Eternals. Love Spider-Man No Way Home, and Shang-Chi is probably, it's not my #1 favorite MCU film, but it is my favorite comic book movie since Logan. I think it's one of the best it is the best comic book film in years, I think. So the fact that we got Shang-Chi and Spider-Man No Way Home in the same year, to me is absolutely amazing. Loved it. All right, next up. James Wheeler writes, I'm so excited to see Spider-Man tomorrow morning at 9, but today I'm going to go see Nightmare Alley. I have still yet to see Nightmare Alley. Ann and I decided we were going to go see Spider-Man No Way Home again this weekend. And then for our second film, we had to choose between Nightmare Alley and The Tragedy of Macbeth. And I'm a Denzel Washington and a Frances McDormand sucker. I'm a big sucker, too, for Bradley Cooper and Bradley Cooper. Why am I forgetting Rooney Mara and everybody else who's in Nightmare Alley? I'm a sucker for them too, but I'm a really big sucker for Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand. Frances McDormand, who is in the conversation for the greatest actress of all time. Don't laugh. She is. She's got 3 Oscars. 3 Oscars. She's in the conversation for the greatest actress of all. I'm not saying she is the greatest actress of all time. I'm saying she's in the conversation. So we ended up choosing that, but I still got to get out and see Nightmare Alley. All right, next up. Stars writes in, they used to say too many villains would ruin movies, but No Way Home handled them so well. Smart to focus on helping them rather than punching robots and aliens. Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but that's exactly what I've been saying forever. The problem with movies, like when people point to The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and say there were too many villains, that wasn't the problem. The problem was they didn't use them well. You look at like the original X-Men movie. You had Magneto, you had Sabretooth, you had Toad, you had Mystique, you had, and then you had the human dude. There are tons of villains. You look at Infinity War. You had Thanos, you had the four of his children, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's 5 villains right there. The problem is not the number of villains you have. The problem becomes, how do you use them? Do you use them properly? Do you balance them out properly? Do you write each of them as interesting characters, no matter how big or how small of a role they play? You can have 10 villains in a movie, and it can work perfectly fine if you write it correctly. You can have 1 villain in a movie and have it be total crap. Like, look at the Fantastic Four films. Doctor Doom. Okay. One villain, that means it's going to be awesome, right? Because it's just one villain. Nah, it's all about how you use them, dude. It's all about how you use them. So well pointed out, Stars. All right. Stars also writes, for months, I've seen theories about Spidey's magic suit. Love how it was just an inside-out suit. I can imagine all the extra toys they'll sell now. Oh, absolutely, dude. Listen, I got bought. See, that's why I say with the Doctor Strange thing, like in the trailer, okay, yeah, including me, we all assume that's the Doctor Strange from What If. But let's also keep in mind it might be something else. Because we all saw the black Spider-Man suit with the magical glove and stuff like that. Oh, it's Wizard Spider-Man, right? Like myself, everybody kind of bought into that. It was just his green painted suit turned inside out with the one little magic blaster thing that Doctor Strange gave him. So what we think we know about a movie from seeing a little glimpse of something often turns out to be something completely different. All right. Next up, Stars also writes, Electro asked about a black Spider-Man. Is this simply a Spider-Verse nod, or do you think live-action Miles Morales is imminent? I think it's just a little wink and a nod. It's just a wink to the audience. That's all it is. I honestly think, and by the way, I don't know this for fact. This is just me guessing, but Sony is supremely happy with how Miles is doing in the animated world. I don't think they want to mess with that. I don't think they want to tip the boat. I think they're very happy and having great success. Hell, they've got Oscars for it. They're going to stick Miles Morales right there in that animated world, having the incredible success. Again, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse may be the best Spider-Man movie ever made. It's, in my opinion, it's better than Spider-Man No Way Home. Why would you risk rushing that into a live action movie when you're making the best Spider-Man movies with him in animated form? So yeah, I think it was just a little wink and a nod. That's all I think it is. Again, I don't know that. This is just me guessing, but that's what I think right now. Right. Stars also writes, with Venom licking Spidey on the TV in Venom 2 and saying he wants to find Spidey in No Way Home post-credit, do you think that Tom Hardy Venom will meet Spider-Man? Yes. And I think it'll be in the Sonyverse. Again, I don't know that that's the case, but I think they've set it up. They can definitely go in that direction. And my guess, if I had to bet $1 on it, not $20, but $1 on it, my guess is that's what's going to happen. All right. Next up, we got Sebastian Gonzalez, who writes, seeing Spider-Man No Way Home a Monday in IMAX with friends for our homie's birthday. Thank God for friends/family to share these experiences with and make memories. Definitely turning into a kid again if I see Tom and Andrew in it. LOL. I mean, look, I've often talked about, I have like people write into me all the time to say, do you think it's okay to go to a movie by yourself? Absolutely. I'll definitely go. If I've got some time in a day and I feel like watching a movie and there's nobody to go, I'll just go myself. No problem. That's great. Have a great time. But it is even better when it's a shared experience with a friend or something like that. It's definitely better. Like I'm very grateful that my first viewing of Spider-Man No Way Home was sitting beside Anne and Ray and all of our friends and all that kind of stuff. And Rob was there, and it just makes it more special when you get to make that a shared experience, dude. I hope you had a great time, Sebastian. All right. Next up, Terrell Wise writes, I feel Spider-Man No Way Home can't really be enjoyed by casuals. No, you're wrong. A lot of casuals saw it and a lot of casuals loved it. So they absolutely enjoy it. They may not get every little nuance, and that's fine though. But clearly millions of casuals, as you call it, saw it, and millions of casuals absolutely loved it. All right. Sebastian, Bembenek. Hope you get your name right, Sebastian. Tipped in like $50. Thank you, Sebastian, for supporting our channel on that level, dude. This is extremely generous of you, man. I appreciate that. And he writes in, this movie made every story beat from the previous two films feel so intentional and satisfying, bringing the character arc to a place that seems so natural and a perfect beginning of a new trilogy. Not an MCU Spider-Man fan, but this movie changed that. I mean, we were talking about that a little bit earlier, Sebastian, right? About the fact that this Spider-Man movie was able to take, you're right, they made it feel as if all the decisions made in the previous films were intentionally made to lead to this MCU Spider-Man later on. Obviously, that's not the case. But the fact that John Watts was able to make it feel like that, just the very fact he was able to make it feel like that is so impressive and so great. And to actually hear like Tobey Maguire talk about maybe some of the struggles he faced after Spider-Man 3. I guess he's telling the story about, you know, after I was just so angry for so long and blah, blah. And Andrew Garfield starts talking about eventually I stopped pulling my punches. Like to hear a little bit of the story that happened to their Spider-Man after the last time we saw them. And then how all that came then into play in Spider-Man No Way Home in lessons they had to impart to the Tom Holland Spider-Man, who's obviously the youngest of the three. And so, yeah, I thought that was great. John Watts, I should say, played it to perfection. He really made it effective. And I love the way you put that. You put it exactly right. Let me read it exactly how you put it again. Where is it? Yeah. This movie made every story beat from the previous two films feel so intentional. You're absolutely right. And that was one of the great things that John Watts, as the director, did. Well pointed out, Sebastian. And again, thank you for supporting our channel on that level, dude. Deeply appreciated. All right. Vincent Taylor writes, where do we go? There he is. Hey, John, when do you think the next time we will see Daredevil? Hawkeye finale? Obviously not. Spider-Man 4 or a Disney Plus series? There are some people who believe there is no Echo show and that Echo is really just a camouflage for a new Daredevil series. I didn't believe that at all. I didn't believe that remotely before seeing Hawkeye. But now that I've seen Hawkeye and realize I have zero interest in this Echo show, and they've got to know they didn't do Echo any favors or any justice, and that's going to get a lot of people really interested in Echo. I don't think there's a ton of people. I'm sure there are some, but I don't think there's a ton of people right now interested in this Echo show after watching Hawkeye. It very well could be a cover. So I don't know. Well, it could be this Echo show. That could be it. It may actually be a Daredevil show. We'll find out soon, Vincent. All right. Mr. Hank Dunn writes, I love the suit Peter wears at the end. Bye, Iron Boy. I completely agree. I was very, very excited, Hank, to see that. That put a huge smile on my face when I saw that. All right. Digovi writes, the movie overall was just immensely satisfying. Moments of raw emotion balanced out with pure joy. Pretty big Thursday night preview number. Should be a good weekend for Peter and co. And of course, this movie ended up making over $250 million. What was it, 253, 254? I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's a big number. Big number. Maybe it was 260. Actually, hold on a second. Let me look this up for a second. Sorry, the initial numbers that came out on Sunday was like 253, but then the actuals that came in on the Monday meant it was even higher. It was actually 260 is what it came out with. So yeah, huge numbers, man. Huge. All right, next up. Power is Power writes, well, I'm sure the Red Room training was hardcore. Has no one told Yelena you need a partner for Trust Falls? Again, we're here talking about Spider-Man Power is Power, but thank you for sending in the comment nonetheless. Mr. Hank Dunn writes, I wish the whole movie was three Peters talking. Dude, to me, that was honestly the best parts of the movie. Like, don't get me wrong. The death of Aunt May was a good scene. The fight with Doc Ock in the initial part of the movie on the bridge. I actually loved the fact that Doc Ock was kicking his ass. Like, the only reason Peter got out of that alive is because he got lucky that Doc Ock absorbed in the nanobots, right? The nanotechnology into his own things. That's the only reason Peter survived, because Doc Ock was kicking his ass. But that was all great. But I agree. The whole movie could have been the three Peters in the lab, on the Statue of Liberty, hanging out watching a football game, going to McDonald's. The three Peters talking could have been the whole movie for me. All right. Addison writes, I'm going to watch No Way Home later today, and I'm ready for the big surprises. Also, it's not in the description for the topics, but it's cool Blue Beetle is becoming a theatrical first film instead of an HBO Max. True, I think that is pretty cool that they moved that over, but I hope you had a really good shock with the big surprises. All right, next up. Don Miller writes, and he sends in like a $20 super chat. Thank you, Don, for supporting us on that level, man. Got tickets for my family and myself at my local B&B theater Sunday evening. What makes it more exciting is they just recently renovated the entire theater, including leather reclining seats, assigned seating, and a full bar. Listen, I've been a little bit spoiled that way because they did that a couple of years ago here in LA, particularly with the AMC theaters, where while I was working with AMC, they did this big renovation, added in the AMC Prime Theater, the two other local AMC theaters, stripped out all the seats and replaced them all with leather reclining seats. And it's just spoiled me for movie going. Like I've been spoiled. Now when I go into a regular theater with a regular seat, I'm like, but yeah, man, I love that. It really has enhanced the movie going experience for me, Don. I'm glad you were able to experience Spider-Man that way. All right, next up, Enrique writes, Sup, gang? Watched Spider-Man Homecoming and Far From Home last night. Got to prep. Going in for No Way Home at 3 p.m. today. This is obviously before he saw it. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. with my friends, and next week with my cousin on Christmas. Let's go. Bring on the filthy. And that brings up a point, Enrique, that Kimberly mentioned today on the John Campea Show, which is that as everybody's writing in talking about, nobody just wrote in and say, I got my tickets singular. It felt like almost everybody's writing in, I got my tickets for tonight and tickets for tomorrow and tickets for Thursday or whatever. Everybody was buying multiple sets of tickets, which tells you just how excited a lot of people were for this movie. Absolutely. All right, next up. Ryan sends in like a $50 super chat. Thank you so much, Ryan. Seriously, guys, thank you so much. You guys are sending like $50. That's amazing. Thank you so much for supporting us on that level, Ryan. And Ryan writes, wow. Everything was done to perfection. The score, cinematography, choreography, the emotional depth. I cried multiple times, laughed, and even screamed. Hats off to you, John Watts. This was one of the greatest movies I've ever watched, and I mean it. Well, I'm glad you liked it that much. I mean, Spider-Man No Way Home is not one of the greatest movies I've ever seen, but it's a damn fun film. And to me, the best of the trilogy. And you know what else makes it even more special? Here's what makes it even more special. It couldn't have come at a better time. I mean, Shang-Chi is still my favorite comic book movie of the year, but as everything is reeling, we got Omicron kind of popping its head up right now, and we don't know what the immediate next couple of months are going to look like and all this kind of stuff. And we needed to be reminded about what it was like to go to the movies and have just this huge thing with the theaters all completely packed and everybody cheering and having a good time. It just couldn't have come at a better time. So John Watts what he did was so impressive. He brought the trilogy home, which is always very, very hard to do, but he brought the trilogy home with the best installment of the franchise. He made it incredibly crowd-pleasing. Pretty much, obviously there are people out there who didn't like Spider-Man No Way Home, and that's cool. It's all film is subjective, but almost universally everybody loved it. The critics loved it. The fans loved it. It made huge box office money. The theaters were full. Everybody was having that big, huge shared experience with an audience and a crowd, and it couldn't have come at a better time. And I'm glad you had that kind of enjoyment. I'm glad you loved it that much, dude. Nothing's better than watching a movie that you love, dude. Nothing is better than watching a movie that you love, and I'm glad that you did. And thanks for sharing that. And again, Ryan, thank you so much for supporting our channel on that level. It's very generous of you, dude. All right, next up. We got Rachel Knight Online, who writes, after watching No Way Home, I started to wonder if the reason Tom's Uncle Ben is never mentioned in the MCU is because he might not have been that great of a guy, or maybe even left May and Peter. You know what I got from it? What I got from it is there was no Uncle Ben. I think Aunt May's been single. I mean, I literally don't think there's been a single reference to Uncle Ben. So maybe there never was an Uncle Ben. And even when the other Peters reference their Uncle Ben, there's no recognition in Tom Holland's Peter's face, right? It's just that's a different thing. So until somebody from Marvel tells me otherwise, my actual assumption right now, Rachel, is that there just was no Uncle Ben. Aunt May was single. That's it. She never got married. In this Tom Holland Spider universe, she just never met Ben, and she never married him. And I think that's kind of an interesting take on it. All right. Rachel also writes, part 2, maybe that's why he loved Tony so much, because with Stark, he finally had a father figure that the MCU's Ben never was. Just a theory. Well, listen, what I was saying also goes with your theory. That with his parents dead and being raised just by Aunt May and not really having a father figure, maybe Tony was that first father figure. Not because Uncle Ben was a bad dude, but just because there was no Uncle Ben. So your theory works perfectly good, Rachel, and I think my theory works perfectly good too. All right. Jake Walsh, Yakko, Tara Jefferson, Brush and Ryu, Cat, Lester John, Christopher Henry all sent in super chat badges just to be supportive. Thank you to all you guys. Michael Effins, Sotelo writes, I think Goblin is Spider-Man's greatest enemy. I go back and forth. I still personally think it's Venom. I mean, there's a lot of good arguments to be made for a lot of different characters. But yeah, who is, not in terms of similarity, but in terms of the antagonism, who is Spider-Man's Joker? I think there's a really good argument to be made for Goblin. To me, personally, it's still Venom, but I see what you're saying. All right. John Brown writes, theory. With the mid-credits scene, I do not think we will see an Eddie Brock in the MCU, but a character we have gotten to know very, very well. Flash Thompson, who becomes Agent Venom in the comics. P.S. How did Venom know Peter Parker was Spider-Man before they got transported? I think that was a light Spider-Man 3 reference there. Just a thought. Again, we already talked about the hive mind theory about that. Listen, I still look. The ending of Spider-Man No Way Home, like I said, leaves it easily open for him to stay in the MCU or go over to the Spider-Verse. Go over to the Sonyverse, I should say. I personally think it's going to be over to Sonyverse, but it very well easily could still be in the MCU. But I'm going to say right now, I don't think it's going to have anything to do with Flash Thompson. I think at this point, they're just going to go back over to the Sonyverse. But after watching this movie, I don't feel as strongly about it as I did before. But because the way they left it open-ended to make it very easy for him to stay in the MCU or go to Sony was brilliant, and they could do it either way and it would work just fine. All right, let's see. Next up, we've got John Brown who writes, we already had that part. Okay. Sains Fiction writes, No Way Home will make any alpha male macho man shed a tear. I love the movie. I'm going to admit, I never shed a tear in the movie. Like I thought that like the Aunt May dying scene was very powerful and very well done. Andrew catching MJ was a very powerful scene. I didn't shed any tears, but then again, I've only shed tears in like maybe 10 movies in my life. So maybe I'm not a good testing point for that, but it was very good emotional stuff in there. Garrett Couch writes, holy crap, best Spider-Man movie of the bunch. I think it's the best Spider-Man movie of the MCU, but that's just my opinion. Between the Aunt May death scene and the Andrew Garfield saving MJ, I just mentioned both of those. Emotional seems very apropos, and I love that brick catch, everything, and the kitchen sink. Again, they just did a lot of things, but to me, the best parts of the movie had nothing to do with the gimmicks. The Charlie Cox gimmick, that was cute, but it was completely unnecessary to the movie. That could have been any lore. It didn't have to be him. It could have been anybody, but still, it worked and it was fun. And the brick catch was hilarious. I still love the line. He goes, how do you do that? I'm a very good lawyer. And then nobody asks a follow-up question. I thought that was funny. I thought that was really well done. But the best parts of this movie are the heart of the narrative. You know, whether you're talking about the Aunt May stuff, whether you're talking about just the conversations that take place between the three various Peters, exchanging the lessons that each of them have learned through their time, getting an insight into what's gone on with the other Peters in that time. The whole notion about where does the greater good lie? You know, in Vulcan philosophy, the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. How does that come and play into it? Those to me were that's the heartbeat of the movie. It wasn't the fact that we had the three Spider-Man. It wasn't the fact that Charlie got, who cares? It was the heart of the narrative and the story and the way they wove all of those elements into one really satisfactory package. And I thought that was really cool, Garrett. All right. Next up, we've got Alonso Hernandez who writes, where'd he go? There he is. My favorite comic book movie ever. Glad Andrew got to save MJ. I could still feel his guilt and pain in his eyes. Toby, Tom, Andrew, I love them all. 10 out of 10. Well, again, certainly, I don't know that I'd have Spider-Man No Way Home. It's not in my top 5. It might be in my top 10 favorite comic book movies of all time. But here's one of the cool things about it. It is pretty much universally loved. Like everybody's liking this movie. Obviously not everybody, not literally, but almost everybody's liking this movie. And whether you feel like it's the best of the three MCU, whether you think it's the best Spider-Man movie overall, whether you think it's the best comic book movie of all time, we can all have our opinions about where we put this movie. But the important thing is almost all of us together, we all went into this movie and had a great time watching it. And it's not often you can say that about a movie. Right? Even really good movies, they'll have like maybe 80-20 split, right? It's very rare that you get a huge event movie like this and almost universally, we all go in, have a great time together, and we all come out just loving it. Now, how much we love it, whatever, it will be different, but the fact that we all love it is great. All right. Alex Perez writes, favorite part was Andrew's redemption and Holland in the coffee shop at the end, realizing it is better to leave MJ being happy without him, all the feels. By the way, I'm so glad you brought that up, Alex, because I haven't mentioned that scene yet. That scene is, to me, honestly, one of the most powerful. It's also probably the simplest scene in the movie. Just no superpowers, no costumes, just coffee shop. Guy walks in, looks at a couple of people, says some things and leaves. And it was one of the most powerful scenes in the movie. And you know how somebody wrote in a little bit earlier pointing that this Spider-Man felt like his maturation process comes full circle. He becomes a man. Iron Boy becomes Spider-Man. And to me, there's no better imagery of that than him standing there. Unlike earlier in the movie where he was incredibly selfish and saying, well, Aunt May says I should try to help these guys, so screw everybody else in the world whose lives I'm putting in danger. That to the end where he can either choose what he wants to have Ned and MJ back in his life or choose what he thinks is best for them. He sees she's happy. He sees Ned is happy. He sees that their lives are in a good place right now. And he chooses to go, you know what? I can come back around to this later if I want. Why risk their happiness right now? They're happy right now. And that choice was honestly, as silly as it sounds, to me, one of the most heroic things we've seen Spider-Man do in these three movies. I thought it was incredible and powerful. I'm so glad you brought that scene up, Alex. I really am. All right. Brandon Barrett writes, Dafoe just jumped Green Goblin to Joker level of cinematic villains. The performance, brutality, manipulation. Goblin came super close to breaking Peter and gave him his one bad day. I loved it. Yeah, I mean, he was... Now, I will say this. The Goblin... Listen, we had three different Spider-Men. We had MJ, we had Ned, we had Electro and Sandman and Lizard and Goblin. I mean, we had a lot of time. So we only had certain amounts of time with each character. Goblin was a little one-dimensional, but that's to be expected. They didn't have a lot of time to go a lot more into that. But whatever it was, Willem Dafoe took what little they gave him in terms of time and whatever. And man, he maxed it out. And he played the hell out of that role. And I just love it. It's one of the better supporting performances we've seen in comic book movies in the last year or two. Like, absolutely. He was just fantastic in it. All right. Next up, Alex Perez writes, it's funny how maturity works. If I saw this movie as a kid, my favorite parts would have been the fight scenes. But as an adult, my favorite parts were the emotional ones. We're just talking about that. Like, my favorite, I think, I talk about my favorite parts of this movie, and none of them are about when Toby came through the portal, or when Charlie Cox was there, or when he punched him in the face. And let's face it, I still geek out about that kind of stuff a lot. But honestly, my favorite parts of this movie, the philosophical life lesson conversations happening between the three Spider-Men. The scene at the end of the movie where, Peter goes into the coffee shop and he sees Ned and MJ happy. Like, it's those scenes to me that elevate this movie from being a really fun fan service movie to a really solid motion picture. With all apologies to the great Martin Scorsese, it's cinema. This movie's cinema. Yeah, it had the attractions and the circus feel, like, oh, look, it's the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man coming through the portal. I mean, like, gimmicky stuff, but it all tied in to serve the narrative. And that's what any tool in a movie should do. Anything, whether it's a betrayal or a surprise or a thriller moment or a piece of comic book novelty. It's just another tool in a filmmaker's tool belt. And if you use those elements to tie them in to make a richer narrative, then you've made a great movie. And when you have scenes like the Aunt May, those conversations, the thing at the end, again, all apologies to Martin Scorsese, but this is cinema. This movie's cinema, and they did it very, very well. All right. Last question today, guys, that we all have time for. And obviously we're going to come back and do a part 3 of this series. Brandon Barrett writes, Hardy was unnecessary fan service and presence didn't make narrative sense to me. They could have had same and effect piece of symbiote left behind with Topher and made narrative sense. I completely agree. I was ultimately disappointed with that little thing. It's like, you're telling me that the whole post-credit scene that got everybody so excited in Venom 2 was for nothing but Tom Hardy sits at the bar for a couple of hours and then gets whooshed back to his universe. And like we talked about a little bit, it made no sense at all that, considering this is a magical spell, that wiped out hard drives, erased pictures, wiped people's memories, everything possibly there. Oh, but the magic spell forgot to take all of the Venom symbiote back. That made no sense. You're right. It would have made far more sense if somehow they just did a post-credit scene where, it just goes down. The cameras go from the cityscape as Peter's swinging through the city. The camera then pans down from the buildings down to the street level into the sewer, and you see a symbiote, right? That a symbiote was on this world too. That would have made far more sense. The post-credit scene in Spider-Man No Way Home actually made the post-credit scene in Venom 2 worse, because it took away any meaning that post-credit scene had. Because we see that post-credit scene in Venom 2, it's like, what does this lead to? Oh, it literally led to nothing, except for something that didn't make sense. And yeah, that part, Brandon, I gotta admit, was a little bit disappointing. All right, guys, listen, that'll do it for all the time we have for now for part 2 of our Spider-Man No Way Home open spoiler discussion. We will have part 3 coming up very shortly. Guys, thanks so much for being here and watching this video. Special thank you to all you guys who sent in those comments and questions. Number 1, because you gave us great things to talk about in terms of Spider-Man No Way Home. And number 2, you supported our channel as you did it. And all of us involved with the John Campea Show, thank you guys so much for your support. Don't forget the John Campea Show is up again tomorrow. Make sure you come back and join us for that and another installment of the Spider-Man No Way Home. We got probably 2 more to go. And anyway, guys, thanks so much for being here. My name is John Campea. Until next time, my friends, bye-bye.